Well, hello, and welcome to this week's episode of It's the Gun Stupid. This is Elliot Fineman, CEO of the National Gun Victims Action Council on the We Act Radio Network. You can find us online at YouTube, on youtube.com, We Act Radio DC, or on our website, gunvictimsaction.org. And one pretty exciting announcement, we're going to be launching our podcast next week, and we'll be reaching even more than the 600,000 people that we currently reach. And people will really be able to listen to us at tremendously convenient times while driving, while resting, while whatever you do when you listen to podcasts. We're going to do our show a little differently this week because we have two extraordinary women as our guests, and we want to spend as much time as possible with them. One is Professor Joan Burbick, who is the author of what has become a classic book about the gun issue, a book called Gun Show Nation, The Lethal Politics of Guns in America. And then at the second half of our show, we'll be talking with Dr. Assistant Professor Marjorie Fujara. She's a professor of pediatrics at Rush Medical School and has spent too much time in the ER working on gunshot victims and has developed a remarkable facility and program for training pediatric surgeons, as well as other doctors in the understanding of the gun issue as a public health issue. So stay tuned. We're going to have a lot of good things going on here. And I'd like to start off with Professor Burbick. Joan, are you out there? Have I gotten you too soon? Well, I don't know if we're connected, but let me say a few things about Professor Burbick, who was born in Chicago, has lived for the last 30 years on the West Coast, is a professor emeritus of English at Washington State University, where she held two endowed chairs in English and liberal arts. She has so many awards and so many accomplishments academically. It would take up a good time to read all of them, but she's been a fellow at the Stanford Humanities Center, a Mellon Fellow at Wesleyan University. She's been a Fulbright Distinguished Chair in American Studies at the University of Warsaw, a scholar in residence in Knox College, and she was awarded a Rockefeller Foundation residency in, of all places, Bellagio, Italy. Professor Burbick, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Elliot. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm so glad you could join us. I'm curious, where are you today? Physically, I mean.
Well, I'm in the state of Washington, which
Okay.
is actually beautiful right now. So it's actually a gorgeous day here. So.
Well, we have, as you know, being a Chicago resident, for the moment we have a very lovely day, but that could change very quickly,
Yes.
as it usually does.
Right.
You have an extraordinary view of the gun issue, and I would like to talk to you about it. And this is going to be a discussion between a strategist, which is my background. Before I was involved in the gun issue, I had my own practice. I was a strategic marketing advisor to Fortune 500 companies. And I would like to talk to you, with you, about your extraordinary view that most people don't have, which is you've had conversations in depth. You're not only a gun owner, but you have had in-depth conversations with all the players on the other side. And that's something that many of the people on the side of looking for sane gun laws feel is necessary and feel would be productive. Uh, I'm not so sure it would be productive, and I'd like to get your take on it.
Right. To write the book on Gun Show Nation, I spent a number of years going to gun shows, and then was an NRA member for 3 years, and did a lot of activities in the NRA, their grassroots organizing, training, and their legal seminar. I think, though, for me, it was really talking with the gun rights organizers, the people who were there early on in the 1970s, talking with them, and them telling me how gun rights was, for them, a way to redirect the political plumbing of America away from the gains that civil rights had given to the Democratic Party. And that it was something I was very unaware of. When I went in, I basically was very naive about the use of gun rights as a political strategy, especially at the ballot box. So when I hear that from someone in an interview, then I go back and try to do as much reading as I can to try to trace that. Did that actually happen? How did that happen? And so I did a lot of research on the American Rifle, and then magazine, the print material that was there for the NRA all the way back. I went way back to the turn of the century, and then all the way up through to quite a way. So to the contemporary time, but I also looked at the political movement of Young Americans for Freedom, which was a counter movement in the 60s, a very active group of conservatives, young conservatives, who crafted a student committee for the right to bear arms, and nurtured the gun rights language as a language to respond to crime. And this had tremendous consequences for the civil rights movement, because there were a lot of perceptions that this was civil riots, that the issues about race in America were issues about crime. And you see evolving a social vision that basically says the way to solve our social problems is to buy a gun, is through gun rights. And
I'm sorry.
That was a very powerful thing to see in the magazines, in the meetings, the political use of the gun rights movement to basically tell Americans the way to solve social problems is to buy a gun. And
it's interesting that when the Black Panthers back in the 60s started carrying their guns around and appearing with guns, there was a big, I think there was even a law passed, Burbick or something, it strikes my memory, but there was a law passed to, make that illegal. Everybody was afraid of the idea of guns being carried, and particularly guns being carried by, Black Panthers. So the pendulum has swung, in many directions. I wonder, being a strategist, my issues always are, why did this happen? What drove it? Your commentary about this being an idea, an ideology advanced by these young conservatives as the gun is a social problem, a solver of social problems, is a little at odds with my practical sense that there was a group of people after the Cincinnati takeover in, I guess, the 1970s of the NRA by the more strident members that morphed into this is money.
yes.
How do we take a product that's and it's a complex product because it has you don't have obsolescence playing on your side. A typical gun, I'm told, lasts for 400 years. So if your customer buys a gun, how do you sell him another one or her another one? And they have come up with all kinds of theories, such as the one you've suggested, or the one that you've uncovered, to this being the absolute guarantor of our personal freedom. Uh, do you see the intersection of money being behind some of the things that you bumped into?
Right. Definitely, I think my book addresses why it's so difficult to have practical gun laws, because the gun rights movement moved into a direction of politics. It was wedded to a conservative vision, which had reinforced certain values. And immediately you see the Second Amendment in the magazines being used to sell. The first notice I saw of this in terms of a gun company was for sites, for gun sites. And the Second Amendment, certainly as I went through gun shows for a number of years, is always being used. It's your right. It's your choice. It's your freedom. Buy, buy, buy. So once you have the language that this somehow is about political freedom, you have a constitutionally protected product. I mean, that's amazing. That combination is of just, the Second Amendment becomes a right to shop. And that's what I say. We've reduced the Second Amendment to the right to shop. And, you have a lot of total hand in glove of Second Amendment gun rights movements and gun industry. It has benefited both because every time there is a crisis, the response is throw more guns, buy more guns, and that benefits definitely the gun industry.
It certainly does. I like your phrase, and I'm going to use it. I made a note of it. The Second Amendment has become a right to shop. It says it more succinctly than what I typically say. But one of the things you just mentioned about the difficulty of changing or getting sane gun laws. I always say that whenever I give a talk or whenever I'm, involved in a debate, I always make the point that there's not one single rational argument, not one, that could be offered to defend any of the insane gun laws we have, and they are insane. And nor is there a single rational argument that could be offered to prevent the sane gun laws we would have, the ones we'd like to get passed. And then I say, when I'm done talking, if you think you have one, bring it on. Let's hear it. And I've never heard one. Have you?
Well,
I'm talking about a rational argument, not an emotional argument.
Right. I think when you, however, from my experience, it is an emotional issue for gun owners and for gun owners who buy into political philosophy. For instance, I had a very good friend, Vietnam vet, out to dinner with him one night, and he turns to me and he says, every time I get mad at the government, I go out and buy a gun. Okay, so this is someone who is a friend. This is not someone who is crazy. This is someone who has bought into a belief system passionately that a form of political expression of his freedom is to purchase a weapon. And I've heard this in many ways from different people, that they do not feel safe. The answer is gun ownership, and it's very emotional. When I'm offered, when people are pitching me guns at gun shows, they will often say, I need this. You as a woman need this to keep yourself safe. That's emotional. That is not logical. And I think that if you only stay at the level of rational arguments, you don't get down to saying, why do you believe that? Let's look at this. Let's step back and try to understand why you believe a gun will do this for you, will give you these powers. And I think you have to me, the gun has become a symbol. And once something's a symbol, it's very difficult to have a rational argument about it. That's my feeling.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. And one of the things that we challenge at National Gun Victims, it's one of our, if you say we have mantras, this is one. We totally do not accept the rationale of so many of our insane gun laws, which is that law-abiding citizens have a right to carry guns to defend themselves, for self-defense. You mentioned the gun show vendor pitching you that you need this as a woman to protect yourself. And our position is that carrying a gun doesn't provide self-defense because the element of surprise always triumphs. If carrying a gun provided self-defense, no police officers would ever get killed, as they tragically do, and tragically, again, just were, so brutally in Nevada. So the idea, we have in fact issued a challenge to the Illinois State Rifle Association, which is the NRA's, organization out here. And we said that we would bet them $50,000, and we would, the argument is you're saying you need to carry a gun for self-defense. We're saying carrying a gun doesn't provide self-defense. But why argue? Let's find out. Let's do a test. And they wouldn't accept the challenge. In fact, they wouldn't even respond because, this myth of self-defense is just that, and they know it. That's why they don't want to play, and it would be very costly for them to to have that myth exposed. But fortunately, there's a group. There's a fellow who writes one of the largest, most highly followed gun blogs, The Truth About Guns, Robert Farrago, who's been on our show, and he polled his listeners, and they've raised 50 grand. And we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. We're just trying to find a venue that has almost like a Hollywood set, where someone can be walking down a street and the assailant will come out, and let's see if they can defend themselves. They'll be sitting in an office, a restaurant, etc. And they're not going to be able to defend themselves. I've told them, save your money, but we don't mind having it. So, there are all of these myths, and it makes having a conversation that leads anywhere almost impossible.
Right.
Do you feel that way? Do you feel, having spoken, having researched, having probably had more in-depth conversations with the gun side, having been a member of the NRA, do you feel that there's any resolution possible through dialogue?
I think that there are a lot of gun owners who are responsive to good gun laws. That I absolutely believe, whether they're hunters or they have, for whatever variety of reasons. It's just that the opposition has had such access to the media, and they are very, very good at what they do, and they are persistent. I mean, this is the playbook for this fusion of gun rights, personal freedom. The militia guy of one who can defend house and home, or when he's walking down the street with concealed carry, has been crafted for, and we're talking 40 years, repetition, right. access. And I think it's who controls the message that, and also that message has been used very very, very, talk about strategy, to get out the vote. And until the people who believe in having smart gun laws believe this has to happen at the ballot, until it becomes a liability for a politician to be perceived as just simply pro-gun without any reflection or understanding of public safety. I mean, until they have to pay for that at the polls, I don't think we're going to get much change. I mean,
Well, I completely agree.
Yeah.
And that's why if you went to our website, one of the first things you'd see is the phrase, "We're done asking."
Yeah.
Because, we are, when you go, our side's gone 0 for 22 years at the federal level. When you go 0 for 22 years, maybe you should try adding some other things. And we feel very strongly that what's been missing, that we've added. We started with Starbucks. You may not be aware of it yet because we've just announced it the last week. We started a boycott of Hallmark, and we're going to make Hallmark become the first corporation to come out and say they support universal background checks, and they're going to advocate for them. They're going to help us get them. We feel, that the other side has so skillfully, and as you've said, repeated it, repetition for 20 years, that the only way we're going to get sane gun laws is to force them. And we have two ways of doing it. One is, that we're working on it. One is to develop a corporate leadership circle to force sane gun laws, because I guess if you could write a rule, if corporate America wants it, we'll get it. It's as simple as that. When Microsoft came out about a year and a half ago saying that gay marriage or marriage equality, or equality was something that they believed in, other companies fell in behind. Starbucks made the same announcement. Others did as well. And lo and behold, it's a year and a half later, and look at the distance we've come. So we think that's one way to do it. And then we have our tell and compel pledge, where when we have a critical mass of that 100 million people that do want sane gun laws, we're going to do some very powerful economic things against states, not against the politicians, but against states, which will force the politicians to move their position. So I don't see how dialogue, and I think you're saying the same thing, can support that. Can lead to what we need. I think what we need is so clear. And the issue that I ponder, you have understood why, and why and how it came to be. I ponder, how are we going to fix it? That's what I care about. And but I had another question I wanted to ask you that you hit upon, and that is, why do we have the Second Amendment? If you listen to the other side, to the pro-gun side, it was to protect against a tyrannical government, and the Founding Fathers put it in. I don't know if you're familiar with Professor Carl Bogus from Rhode Island. He wrote
right.
the Hidden History. I'm sure you are, because you're probably a student. You've probably read more than anybody about this stuff. So what do you think about that? His point being that the only reason we have it was to enable slavery to continue.
Yes, I have come to believe that the reason the U.S. is different from, let's say, Australia or England in its gun ability to enact good gun legislation is because of our history of slavery, the Civil War, and Civil Rights era. And the case of the Black Panthers is a perfect example. I mean, you had Martin Luther King, a massive nonviolent movement that moved across faith, moved across the race line, solidarity that was very effective. You had an incident in Oakland, and that's set off the reaction of white rifle owners. It played into the hands, justified gun rights language. And I think that what you saw in the early days of the militia, certainly during slavery in the South, where state militias were used to keep the slave system intact. And when you look at the George Wingate, who was the founder of the NRA, he was a officer in the New York militia. And the reason he founded the organization was because he saw really the poor use of rifles, disciplined use of rifles within the militia. And at that point it was a voluntary militia. And that in terms of urban problems like the Orange Riots in New York City, which were between Protestants and Catholics. And so, the militia was a place by the 19th century where volunteer soldiers performed what they considered their civic duty. And it's kind of an irony that that the NRA would disavow George Wingate's history, which really is about the militia. And the militia was used, of course, politically in very ineffective and prejudicial ways in the United States. Its history, if you read the history of the militia, either as a obligated militia early on or a voluntary militia as it evolved in the 19th century. And, of course, this is what we have as our National Guard. Yes. So, the Second Amendment, to me, even within the NRA, if you look at the early magazines, it was about the militia. And, of course, you have officers. You have a chain of command. You have particular weapons that can and can't be used. You have training. This is all when you got up later, like Harlan Carter and the Cincinnati Revolt, and then are in the 70s, his language was, forget that. I'm a militia person. Without being part of a militia person, I'm an enforcer. I'm, the good guy.
A civil rights fighter.
Yeah, right. I'm the Crime Stopper. I'm the Patriot. He called it a Patriot Army. This is heavy-duty language in the 70s within the NRA, and it's a huge change if you read from the 19th century up through, you read the magazines, as I did. I read all the magazines all the way up. You see this language, and whoa, it is so strong, and I think it is implicated in our racial past very strongly. It is.
Well, one of the things, and then we'll take a break for just 2 minutes. But one of the things that struck me when I went back and did research, around the time of the Constitution, ratification of the Constitution, was they have population statistics, and the slaves typically were in the heavy slave states could be 35, 40, 45% of the population. And the militias were used to keep order. The funny thing about slaves, they didn't like being slaves.
Right.
So they would rebel, they would leave, they would, and the militias' tactics, which of course were ultimately adopted by the Ku Klux Klan, were, the militia was the key to keeping the economic order back then. Well, lots more to talk about. Let's take a little break, and I'll be right back with you, and we will continue our discussion. I think you're someone I could talk with for a long, long time, much more than we'll have time for here today. But let's visit a few more subjects here. Okay.
I'm a third grade teacher.
I'm a school bus driver.
I am a parent.
I am a teacher's aide, and I agree to be identified
As a caring adult who pledges to help bullied students.
I will listen carefully to all students who seek my help.
and act on their behalf.
to put an immediate stop to bullying.
I will work with other caring adults to create a safe
Learning environment for all the students in my school.
In my school.
In my school.
in my school.
I'm Dennis Van Rokel, president of the National Education Association. Help us create safe, bully-free learning environments for all students. One caring adult can make all the difference. Be that adult and take the pledge at nea.org/bullyfree. Adults have the power to stop bullying in our schools.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
Bully-free. It starts with me.
Visit nea.org/bullyfree. A message from the National Education Association.
Packers,
Vikings,
Red State,
Blue State.
We come from different places.
Uptown,
Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
half empty,
Half full.
But no matter how different we are, we're all connected, and we can all make a difference. That's why United Way brings people, expertise, and resources together to improve the education, income, and health of our communities, the building blocks for a better life. When we live united, our efforts, magnified by others, add up to real change. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly, so do our communities. But real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So let's look beyond our differences.
Live united.
One by one, let's make a difference. Let's reach out a hand to one and influence the condition of all.
Live united.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Okay, we are listening to It's the Gun, Stupid. We're back with the wonderful Joan Burbick, the Professor Emeritus of English from Washington State University, someone who has focused a lot of her work and interest on understanding and explaining national narratives, and has used that interest to write a book that, as I mentioned earlier, has become a classic, written in 2006, Gun Show Nation, Gun Culture and the American Democracy, Joan, we were talking about a lot of things, and I'd like to ask you the following question. It's a little of a strange one, but if you had a magic wand, what would you do, knowing everything that you've written and talked about and researched? What would you do to change things?
Now, at this point in time, it's difficult because we have such a long history now of the gun rights language permeating throughout the country. For me, I think good gun laws, of course, are important, but I'm going to say that for me, we have to convince Americans that there are other ways to have secure communities and secure homes. We have to break the link between the gun as a social problem solver. And I think, for me, that means really investing in communities in the United States, especially at-risk communities where there's unemployment, whether that's urban or rural. And so I look at this as I know this is a difficult answer, and but to me, it has to be across race lines, really understanding communities that are at risk, and including people in communities that are at risk in the conversation. I really do believe the gun laws need to be changed, but I think with that, the mentality behind guns, that they are some easy solution, whether you're a Lone Ranger guy out there or whatever. This is a fantasy of force, what I call the militarization of the American mind. And I think that how we change that is so important for us as a democracy, because that means that we will begin to believe again that we can have healthy, safe communities. And that takes a lot of courage. Because I see a lot of people I talk to, it's, just buy a gun. Really? Okay. What does that do for you? I mean, even young men that I know that buy a gun, I'm like, how about a job? How about some political and economic power? This is where the gun has become, to me, a surrogate, a substitute for real political power, real economic power. And that worries me about the United States. It's that mentality, that militarized mentality, which, you say these guys are going to come out and shoot it up, this fantasy of force. And I saw this all the time at gun shows. I mean, it's very fantasized. And other people I know who I'd walk on shows with who had a lot of training, who were ex-military, and they were like, whoa, okay, how could you, where is this coming from, this fantasy, this fantasized place that people inhabit, that guns they're going to be these shoot-'em-up Crime Stoppers. I guess I want to raise that because I do see as a group, as a culture, we've backed away from a certain sense that we can solve problems.
Well, it's a part of the culture or a part of the population. The numbers are pretty stunning. The ones that that I'm familiar with are that polls continually show that there are 100 million Americans that want sane gun laws. That doesn't mean they're doing anything, but they want them. They claim, the NRA, that they have 4 million members, and the polls show that 3/4 of them are okay with sane gun laws too. They don't think people should be walking around with militarized rifles, AK-15s. They don't think cop killer bullets should be sold. They're okay with registration. So that leaves 1/4 or 1 million. So here you have a contest with, one between 100 million and 1 million. And that should be no contest, except the 1 million is killing the 100 million, and our sense of it is that if we can leverage the buying power of the 100 million, we can force sane gun laws, because I don't think we're going to get them by appealing to reason. Obama's frustration the other day, is just that, frustration. I don't think anything could happen. I literally don't think anything could happen where people would say, okay, now we've got to make a change. It was thought that Sandy Hook would do that, but as we see, it didn't. So
right.
Here's an interesting thing, that supports what you've just said about the gun being the problem solver. I gave a talk at Columbia University here in Chicago. There's a professor that likes me to speak to her classes during the semesters, and I do. And afterwards, a very bright African-American woman came up. Maybe she was, I'm going to say, 19, okay, and had asked some good questions during the Q&A. And she said to me that her boyfriend had just bought a gun and had bought the gun, and I said, and she explained, had bought the gun for self-defense, that he needed to have a gun to be safe. She hated it. She was afraid of it. So I asked her, to go ask her boyfriend, and please call me back, which he did, to go out into the neighborhood, where he lived, and get stories of people who had used their guns for self-defense. Just how, and also the situation, the scenario. So she calls me back 3 days later, and guess what? He didn't get one. There wasn't one story. They were all stories of being used to, express anger, or for offense, for whatever reason, it was. But he couldn't come up with one instance where somebody was under siege and they had used their gun for self-defense. So it's a myth. It's a complete myth. We're hoping that when we do find the venue for doing this experiment, and we expose that carrying a gun doesn't provide self-defense, that could have a profound impact on the conversation. The other thing is, since we've got 100 million to a million, we really don't have to have the conversation if the 100 million use their buying power,
Right.
correctly.
Right.
So we're up against a very, very crafty, other side, driven, I'm now putting my business hat on, but driven by how to maximize sales and profit, in a limited type of industry, and they've done an extraordinary job. Of course.
Yes, right. Absolutely. I was going to say, here's a recent ad, because they're the gun industry trying to, always are trying to get women involved in being shooters. So one ad says, "I carry, it's my right, it's my choice." For a woman, the choice. And, that's the kind of pitch you get. And I think concealed carry laws have been a huge boom to the gun industry, because you have all these nano guns out there, and as our assault style, our military style weapons, anything based on the AR-15, this is that fantasy of force. This is the thrill. Large capacity magazines. You really see a advertising system that works, and it goes so smoothly along with the gun rights language.
No, it's infected. It's infected the conversation.
Yeah.
And the judge in Illinois, we were the last state to have conceal and carry, and the judge who ordered it, he was, the guy who wrote there was a 3-judge panel, and the have a right to carry guns for self-defense, and that's the gun language. That's the gun, the NRA's language, the gun industry's language. So, Joan, I don't know if you can hear me. I got a message that we had a problem with the call. Are you still there? Can you hear? Well, I'm just going, I don't know if anybody can hear me. I hope so. I'm going to just make a few comments, and if Joan can come back and join us, that would be wonderful. But I think some of the things she has said have been really illuminating, in the sense that maybe we've kind of thought these things were the case, but no one has more on the ground. Joan, are you back with us?
Yes, I am.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I felt so badly.
Yeah, I know. I sort of disappeared there for a minute into radio space.
Well, this is technology, right? Maybe the gun industry is not liking what we're saying, so they're putting out interference. Who knows? But glad we got you back. And
Yes.
yeah, I think I was saying that you have kind of confirmed what people suspect. Who has more time speaking to people on the other side? I don't know anybody who does. For example, I know there was a group. I know two groups. One is a clerical group, and one is the parent. A group called Sandy Hook Promise is a group that formed after the massacre at Sandy Hook, and it's mainly parents. And I've spent a lot of time in Sandy Hook, and I've met many of the people there and worked with them. In fact, we're doing the Hallmark boycott with the Newtown victims and clergy for social responsibility. But their goal is to talk to the other side, reasoning that their parents, their grandparents, they have families. Everybody wants their children and their grandchildren and their communities to be safe. And somehow, by talking to them, change will occur. I'm not so sure, and I'm even more clear, or more convinced that my not so sure position is correct, hearing your comments. So, what to do? We just can't continue like this, and we're hoping that our economic lever will, be a big increase, to our side's ability to make change. And I'd love to have you back on the show, Joan. I'd like to meet you in person. I'm actually going to be in San Francisco for the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence's annual fundraiser at the end of June. Maybe if you drop down, we could say hello. But
right.
if not, I'm going to make it a point for us to meet in person, one way or another.
All right. Well, I've enjoyed talking with you. It's good, and I think people should talk with friends about this, and it's amazing. It's important to do that. I just don't think it necessarily changes the people in power who are the strategists who use this very effectively in the industry and at the ballot box. That's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
Yeah, no, we're going back to Gandhi, in the salt strike. We're going to use economics, and we're going to force it. We're not going to ask. We're going to tell them what to do, and if they don't, we're going to deliver some hardship. It's the only thing that I feel we have left. We have our buying power, and if we can use it cleverly, we can make the change. Well, listen, don't buy any Father's Day cards from Hallmark or graduation cards from Hallmark. We have some free ones that are gun related that you can download from our website or send electronically or buy other companies' cards. But we've got to get Hallmark off the sidelines. And, that's a big thing. So take care. And hope to talk with you again, and we'll look forward to meeting you in person one of these days.
Yes, and good luck with all that you're doing.
Thank you. And if there's anything you'd like to follow up with, please contact me. We're real easy to reach, and would look forward to following up with you. Okay.
All right.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will speak with Marjorie, Dr. Marjorie Fujara, who's a pediatric professor and also attending physician at one of Cook County's most involved hospitals regarding the gun issue. So see you in a couple of minutes.
Today might be the day I drop out of school. Today could be the last day I try. My parents alone can't stop me. My friends can't even stop me. But you might be able to. With United Way, you could tutor me, be my mentor, or volunteer to just read with me. If someone had helped me earlier, I might not be struggling. And studies prove that kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. There are tons of ways people like you can help kids like me stay in school. And United Way is calling for you to be one of them. Because it takes 12 years to create a graduate. It takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between me becoming one or the other could be you. Make me a success, not a statistic.
Take the pledge to volunteer now at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Let me tell you who to blame. Blame the boy lying at your feet, his body oozing life through the hole in his stomach where the bullet tore him apart. Blame him for challenging you, for not looking away and for not backing down when you pulled out the gun. Blame your mother for bringing you into this world when she was but a kid herself and for dragging you up, not bringing you up. Blame society for not giving you hope. Blame your father for not being there, the man who looked after himself instead of looking after you. Blame the gun in your hand for making you a target, for making you more likely to be picked on. Blame the dead boy, blame your mother, blame society, blame your father, blame the gun, blame anyone but yourself for not being strong enough to put down the gun, to break the cycle.
Well, welcome back to It's the Gun Stupid, and we had a wonderful conversation with Professor Joan Burbick, and now we have a wonderful and important commentator, Dr. Marjorie Fujara, who's an assistant professor of pediatrics at Rush Medical College and is an attending physician with the Division of Child Protective Services at John Stroger's Junior Hospital in Cook County, Chicago. Professor Fujara has made it a personal crusade and a personal interest to teach residents and students, medical students, about gun violence as a public health problem. A problem similar to, say, cigarettes, and to treat it the way one would treat epidemics. So we're really thrilled to have her with us, and I had the pleasure of meeting her, Marjorie, Dr. Fujara, in person, and looking forward to our conversation today. How are you today, by the way?
Well, Elliot, thank you for having me.
Well, it's really a pleasure. What I'd like to do, I went through your slideshow. Thank you so much for sending it.
Sure.
The one that you use to inform and teach the students about, by the way, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. Is it Fujara? Is that the right way to say it?
It's actually Fujara.
Fujara. Okay,
yes.
Well, I apologize.
That's okay.
I apologize. So everyone understand we're talking to Professor Marjorie Fujara. Got it. Okay. I went through your slides, and I would love if we had the time to go over each of them. but I'm going to make you an offer, which I hope you can't refuse, which is to do a series on our blog, on our, we have a blog, a Gun Victims Action blog, which we post on Facebook. We have over 45,000 followers, growing as we go forward. And my thought was that maybe you could do a series of, I know there's something like 35 slides. Maybe we could do 3 or 4 or 5 slides, an article, and get this out to a whole lot of people, because the information's terrific. So that's an offer, and you can consider whether you'd like to accept it or not.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I did make some copies of some of the slides, and I wanted to talk about, I should have numbered them, but this one's called Gun Violence Slide. And you have several bullet points, but one is what can we learn from other public health issues? And I thought it might be useful if you could comment about that, for our audience.
Sure. Well, let me start with saying how I decided to take this project on and look at gun violence as a public health issue. And as you know, the concealed carry law was being drafted in Illinois about a year ago. And as it was going through the state assembly, I became curious with what does the public health data say about states that have enacted concealed carry laws. And what I was shocked to learn is that there is no public health data. Nobody has collected information in states where they allow concealed carry as to how often does a gun discharge accidentally when someone drops it in public? How often are people injured unintentionally? How often are they used inappropriately? And information about injuries and death related to carrying weapons in public. And I was shocked to learn that nobody has a repository for this information. The Violence Policy Center does a great job at tracking newspaper and TV stories on this topic, but there is no, that I know of, public health repository where somebody is carefully tracking this information, because certainly guns are a public health hazard. They're inherently dangerous. They're designed to kill people. So that's really how the project started. And so I started to think about other public health problems that were similar to gun violence. And I really thought of, the first one that came to mind was tobacco. And I thought there were some interesting parallels there, because no one thought anyone could bring big tobacco down, but somehow we did. And so I thought there was a lot to be learned in how the medical field approached the problem of tobacco and smoking. And if we look at other obvious public health parallels with car crashes, and the advent of seat belts and airbags, and how those at one time weren't very, it wasn't very common for people to be clicking it every time they got in the car. I don't think most of us would think twice about doing it now. Or putting your child in an infant car seat. That actually was a very heated battle back in the 70s to get state legislatures to pass car seat laws for infants. And again,
hard to imagine. That's looking back now.
Yeah, and it's so socially acceptable. So I really became intrigued with this idea that, social norms change laws just as laws change social norms. There's really an interactive relationship between the two.
Well, I've lost hearing you for the moment. Okay, now you're back.
I'm here.
Okay. Yes, I heard you say something very, very interesting, a great observation, that social laws change attitudes, and attitudes change social laws. They're interactive.
Right.
And
Very
I
much
think that's
so.
very powerful and very true.
Yes. And I guess I've really come to the place where I've become a little discouraged with the legislative process on this issue, and I really think where I'd like to see physicians and other health professionals put their energies is into helping shape and influence our social norms around guns and gun violence, because I really think that's going to be more powerful and effective.
Well, you know that the gun industry, specifically the NRA, has choked research. They forced the CDC and the other research, the NIH, the National Institute of Health, to stop. They couldn't stop the research, so they stopped their funding. So they de facto stopped the research. And they have labeled research, if you know, and you're a scientist, of course, being a doctor. This is so astonishing. They've labeled research as propaganda against guns.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
So according to that, we should know nothing. We should have no knowledge about anything, because any knowledge about anything is propaganda against that thing.
Right.
So
I think they know the truth. They know what the data, started to show. And I don't know if you know the history behind why they decided to silence the CDC research.
Well, I do, but why don't you review it for our audience? Because many people, I'm sure, are not familiar with it.
Sure. There was a very influential article published in the New England Journal of Medicine, written by Art Kellerman and his colleagues, that looked at the presence of having a gun in your home and the risk of homicide occurring with somebody you know or love, and that being much greater if you had a gun in your home. And once that article was published, that was kind of the point where the NRA decided that they needed to stop this.
Couldn't have any facts coming out.
No, not at all. But if you look back to it, what happened with big tobacco, they did the same thing. Tobacco companies were doing research on the effects of nicotine and how addictive it was and how harmful smoking was and all the various chemicals that you inhale when you smoke. And the research was so damaging that they decided what they would do is they sent it to attorneys. They sent the information to attorneys so it would be protected under the attorney-client privilege and that it couldn't be accessible to the public.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. A lot of people said that after Sandy Hook that would be a tipping point, and lead to change. I never looked at it that way. I looked at Sandy Hook as the secondhand smoke moment of the gun wars. By the way, again, I don't know, are you hearing me?
Yes, I am. Are you hearing me?
Good. Because we had a little technical trouble on the first part of the show, and you don't know if it's still here, but I think we're okay now. So I think what happened with the tobacco is that the first report that came out and said that tobacco causes, cancer, that the tobacco companies had known about this for years and had hidden it, just as you've now told us the mechanism they used. Amazing.
Right.
The mechanism, if I ever have anything to hide, I know how to do it.
Exactly.
But that report hit two types of viewers. One was readers. One were the people who smoked, and one were the people who didn't smoke. So for the people who didn't smoke, it was moral outrage. How could any company do such, industries do such a thing, to know that their product is so dangerous and not report it? but nothing, they were outraged, and moral outrage tends to dissipate. The people who did smoke got it, and they said, well, I guess we'll have to try to stop smoking and, get our kids not to smoke. But nothing changed.
Right.
Nothing changed. When the second report came out, the second report saying that secondhand smoke, being in a theater, being in a restaurant, being in an office where people were smoking was as bad for you as smoking, then it affected everyone.
Absolutely.
And now everything changed.
That's right.
And my feeling about Sandy Hook was that everyone has kids, or grandkids, or knows people that have kids. And this, along with the Aurora Theater, but this even more so, was kind of like, hey, this affects everyone.
That's right.
And I was hoping, and I still am hoping, we can build from that. But I don't know what happened with seatbelts. Did they go through a similar kind of, the information's hidden and then it came out, and do you know the history of that? I don't remember.
I do not know that specifically, but just clearly, laws influence people using them in that way more so than as with infant car seats. I know there was a lot of really good data showing that infants who were restrained were more likely to survive a car crash. But I don't know specifically if that's what led to seatbelt laws, or if, again, it's such an interactive, dynamic relationship. I'm not really sure which came first.
Well, it's I'm sure we could find out. You say another thing on your slide, on this very first slide, which is, what can you do, you being a medical practitioner, do in an office visit to prevent gun-related injuries and fatalities? And what do you teach, or tell the people?
Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that we ask our families about guns, and ASK is an acronym that stands for Asking Saves Kids, and basically it encourages pediatricians to ask about guns in the home of the family, and to ask parents to ask their children's friends' parents if they have guns in their homes. Many parents are very conscientious these days about talking to parents ahead of a play date to alert them if their child has certain allergies to something that they can't eat or drink, or they have certain rules about television or video games, but it only makes sense that we should ask about something that is potentially lethal, and that is the presence of handguns in the home. Children are curious. Children are very good about finding things, and guns are particularly, as research has shown, children are very interested in guns and want to see how they work.
Well, and I've seen some videos of tests they've done.
Yes.
Telling the children, don't, if you find a gun, report it. And some do, but most don't.
Right.
They pick it up and start playing with it.
That's right.
This was the kind of, down in Florida, the NRA tried to, and for a while I think succeeded in getting a law passed that pediatricians could not ask parents about whether they had guns. Has that been repealed now, or put on hold? Or
it's my understanding that physicians in Florida can ask about the presence of guns in homes, and we affectionately refer to that as the docs versus Glocks law.
Very good. I like that. But in fact, you weren't versus Glocks. That's how the NRA tried to position it.
Right.
You were for child safety, for infant safety.
That's right.
And why do you think they were so, anxious to kind of get a gag, order or a gag, placed on pediatricians. What do you think the gun industry's motive behind that was?
Well, I think they're afraid of information, much like wanting to, strangle attempts at research. They don't want people talking about this, and it creates public awareness when you make people think about, gee, my doctor asked me about guns. I wonder, if I should ask my child's best friend's family if they have a gun in their house. I know them, but I don't even know that answer. And really, that public awareness is very powerful. Think about all the people, the surveys you read about physicians' influence on patients quitting smoking. We learn that just the fact that your doctor suggests to you should consider smoking does play a role in your decision to do so.
Yes, it absolutely does. So what you're kind of saying is, here's where it breaks down for me. The pediatricians weren't saying don't have a gun.
Right.
You were saying if you have a gun,
right.
How is it stored? Here's how you should store it. Here's how it should be, kept, so that your child or infant, can't have access to it.
Right.
And why would they be against that? What rational reason could you possibly have to be against something like that?
That's very difficult for me to understand. I don't know.
Yeah. One of the things that is so frustrating is we have tried to get CAP laws, child access prevention laws, passed and can't get them passed. The typical argument against them by the other side is that if you're in your home and an intruder comes in, if you have to go through opening a locked box to get your gun, that could cost you your life. You'd lose that time, the time you'd lose opening the box and getting the ammunition. And my response to that is always that, look, if an intruder bursts into your house, there's two conditions that will exist. Either they will have you, they'll be holding a gun over you,
right.
or on you. In other words, they'll have surprised you. This comes back to the element of surprise always trumps the gun carrier, which is one of the things we always say. So if they've surprised you with their gun, you're not going to reach for your gun even if it's not in the box.
That's right.
You're not moving.
Right.
If you hear them downstairs and your goal or your position is that you're going to surprise them, you've got plenty of time to open your box
right.
and get the gun and load it. So it's just a ridiculous argument. If your life depends on how quickly you can open the box and get the gun loaded, assuming you had it stored unloaded, but if your life depends upon that, it's too late.
Right.
It's too late to defend yourself. But one of the things that I saw some research on recently is that often the mother will tell the pediatrician that she would be very happy to store the gun, but her husband won't do it. It's his gun, and he won't store it safely. So what do you do?
That's a difficult one.
I know, but it's so irrational. It's just so irrational. It's.
I think that was the whole point of Kellerman's paper, is that it's so much more dangerous to have a gun in your house, period, but particularly if it's unlocked and loaded. And children are just amazing. I remember my brothers and I would find all the great hiding spots my mother thought she put our Christmas presents in.
Yes, there are no secrets, right?
Right, that's right.
Well, I noticed one of your slides, it was an objective slide, which caught my eye. Actually, they all did. It's just I didn't know, that's why I thought of making you the offer that I made,
Thank you.
which still stands, and I will ask you about it when we get to the end. Of course, you may be too busy to do it, but maybe you already have this done. But you, on your objective slides, you describe the scope of the problem of gun violence in the U.S. and recognize its lasting impact on society. I'd love you to comment on that, because I spoke to a grown man, an attorney, maybe in his 40s, whose father had been murdered, by a gun. He was a homicide victim. And he made the comment that really stayed with me. He said that when something like that happens, it affects 3 generations. And it always stayed with me. What is what do you say to the people you're teaching about what's the lasting impact, of something, of a gun event?
I refer to it as collateral damage. And there is certainly, for people close to a victim of gun violence, there is the profound loss, the grief, the depression, the post-traumatic stress disorder, the guilt, particularly I think for parents who lose their child. One of our primary roles as parents is to protect our children and to keep them safe. And the reality is we can't be with them every moment, but we wish that we could protect them from any harm. But I guess when in my work at Stroger, what I've really become aware of is the other reverberation from gun violence in a community, which is obesity. Childhood obesity in Inglewood, one of the most violent neighborhoods in Chicago, has a rate of 70% among 2 to 5-year-olds.
Wow.
70.
Wow.
And we know that obesity is more likely to occur in places where there is less access to safe green spaces. And when there's people firing guns in your neighborhood, you obviously are not free to go to the park and play and run around and just have a normal childhood. I was struck by an 8-year-old boy I saw in my clinic one day who just offhandedly mentioned he couldn't sleep the night before. And I said, really, why not? And he said, somebody was firing an AK-47 in the street.
Oh, my God.
And he said it to me like he told me, it rained out last night. I mean, yeah. I was shocked that he said it with such, so casually. And I thought, how can this child be expected to go to school and learn when they're living in an environment? I mean, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a safe neighborhood where we were able to play, outside of our parents' eyes, on the block with our neighbors, and we never had to worry about a gunshot. And so I'm thinking about all these other public health problems, like childhood obesity that gets a lot of attention that we probably don't spend enough time talking about. We talk about a lot of these neighborhoods are food deserts. They don't have access to healthy produce and such. But I think the absence of healthy green spaces. The other thing is ADHD, attention deficit disorder, is much higher in areas of Chicago where poverty is a big problem. And we know that children, again, who have access to healthy green safe green spaces have lower rates of attentional problems and behavior problems. So there's all these things that we don't think about immediately when we think about, gun violence, but they are clearly, an effect that just, and that does continue for generations for sure.
It's an epidemic. You almost get the visual sense of a cloud enveloping the country. Yeah. With this gun issue, you had a slide, and we're kind of coming reasonably near the end. But I do want to ask you. You had a slide that called "Gun Deaths in the Industrial World,"
Yes.
and in that slide, they have, I could think, on the y-axis the number of deaths, gun deaths per 100,000.
Yes.
And you compare it, you show it by country. I'd like you to read just a couple of countries, if I could ask you to. What's the gun rate death per? Is it per 100,000 or 200,000? I just don't remember.
Per 100,000.
Per 100,000.
Yes.
In Great Britain.
In Great Britain, let me find it here. Let's see.
It was to the left, as I recall.
Yes, far to the left. It's a lower. No, I can't. Oh, United Kingdom. That's why I can't.
Oh, United
it.
Kingdom. That's my bad. Sorry.
Less than. It's about 0.1.
0.1
Yes.
per 100,000.
Yes.
So that would mean that would be 1 in a million.
Yes.
Okay, so let's just write these down. So 1 in a million is the gun homicide rate in Great Britain.
Yes.
What is it in Australia?
In Australia, it is also 0.1.
So same thing, 1 in a million.
Yes.
And we know, that they have pretty sane gun laws in those two countries.
Right.
How about France?
France is also at 0.1.
Really?
Yes.
I was just picking out countries that I normally talk about. What about Italy?
Let's see. Italy is a little higher. It's at about 0.6.
0.6 per 100,000. So to convert it, you'd have to divide each side by 0.6. So I don't have a calculator in front of me, but probably, if I did math in my head quickly, it's probably like 1 in a million and a half, as opposed to 1 in a million. Sorry.
Oh, it's actually higher.
It would be less than 1 in a million. It would be less than 1 in a million.
Right.
Well,
actually, the gun-related murder rate in Italy is higher than Great Britain.
Yes. So in Great Britain, where it's 1 in a million, in Italy it might be 1 in half a million.
Right. Well, yes. Yes.
You'd have to do the conversion.
Right.
And just 2 more countries, Japan.
Japan is immeasurable. You can't even. It doesn't even show up.
That's how small it is.
They're at the farthest left. Yeah.
And of course, we know who's on the farthest right, which is the U.S. What is it in the U.S.?
3.25.
3.25 per 100,000.
Yes.
So that's roughly 10 per. That's 10 per 3. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not as. It's a third. It's roughly a third. So it's roughly 1 for every 300,000, 1 for every 250,000. Is that right? No, that can't be right.
No,
it's 1 per 50,000 or 30,000.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So we have, in round numbers, 1 for every 50,000. And England, a country very similar to ours, they have poverty, they have drugs, they have gangs, they have immigration issues.
They have mental
They have
illness.
everything, including sane gun laws. They have 1 in a million, homicides. 1 person for every million is a gun homicide victim, whereas we have 1 person for every 50,000 is a gun homicide victim. If I were on a TV show as a lawyer, I would say I rest my case.
I wish we could and make it different.
Yes, we have to do something. the different, sane gun laws matter. That's the takeaway from this. So let me not well. Let me ask you: would you be interested in doing a blog?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Well, okay. Well, our senior editor, Martha Rosenberg,
I
and
do.
we've met, of course. So we're going to set this up. And maybe once a week you would do a few, a slide or two, or maybe one slide a week. It doesn't have to be done. But I think that would be wonderful, a wonderful way to expand the reach of the research and information you have. And I think it would be an extraordinarily important contribution. So thank you. We're going to do this with you.
Thank you. I appreciate
Okay.
that. Okay.
Well,
thank you, Elliot.
Thank you, Marjorie. And just so you know, I got it right, Dr. Fujara. And make sure not to buy any Hallmark. I'm going to talk about Hallmark in my closing comments here. But don't buy any Hallmark Father's Day cards or graduation cards.
I won't. None of my friends are either. I've spread the word. So.
Wonderful. And if you want to send a gun-related card from our side, you can go to our website, www.gunvictimsaction.org, and download for free one of the 5 Father's Day cards we have, or you could send it electronically, and you can download for free a graduation card, or
Wonderful.
or send it electronically. So. Or buy someone else's, but Hallmark is off limits until they show up and do the response. Until they walk their talk. Their talk is they love families and kids, but when it comes to protecting kids and families from firearms, they're nowhere to be found. So we got to get them back where they're supposed to be.
Everybody needs to
thank you so much, Marjorie, and we will follow up and get this series started. It'll be a great, great series, and we thank you for doing
wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay.
Okay. Well, I'm going to just close. We only have a few minutes left here. I just want to mention why Hallmark. Why have we singled out Hallmark? Well, Hallmark was approached by us, National Gun Victims Action Council, with our partners, the Newtown Victims and Clergy for Corporate Responsibility. We also got a number of other religious organizations and a number of other secular organizations to sign a letter that we sent to them, asking them to publicly announce that they support universal background checks, and also to stop allowing guns in their Hallmark, the stores, the Hallmark Golden Crown stores. Their response to our letter was that the chairman said, "We, Hallmark, do not get involved in divisive issues." That's from a company that has 8 lobbyists that they spend over $500,000 a year lobbying for things like telephone rates and postage rates and taxes and, other divisive issues. But they don't get involved in divisive issues. Here's the skinny on Hallmark. They ban guns in their corporate headquarters. Can't go in there with a gun. Why? Because they know that guns are dangerous in an environment. They also do not require that their Hallmark Golden Crown stores ban guns, nor do they require them to put up a sign saying guns are welcome here, to at least warn their customers. And finally, they have issued a public statement. Their spokesperson issued a public statement saying that Hallmark as a company would never support any anti-gun initiatives. What's an anti-gun initiative? It's a gun regulation. It's like background checks. Hallmark, in other words, supports the NRA's pro-gun agenda, their lethal gun agenda. So the NRA doesn't think there should be any background checks. Well, count Hallmark in. They don't think there should be any background checks either. The NRA thinks it's okay for people to walk around with semi-automatics and with magazines that can shoot 50 or 100 bullets a minute. Well, count Hallmark in. They're in for that as well. The NRA doesn't think we should have smart triggers so that only the owner can shoot their rifle or gun, and that nobody else, a kid picking it up or anyone else, a criminal getting it, can't use it. The NRA is against that, so of course Hallmark's against that. Well, we're not going to let Hallmark or any other corporate organization stay on the sidelines. Hallmark's the first, and Hallmark is going to be out of business for us until they show up and do what they claim they care about, which is families and kids. They don't get involved in divisive issues. Well, guess what, Mr. Hallmark? You're involved, and we're going to keep you involved till you do the right thing. Okay, this is Elliot Fineman, CEO of National Gun Victims Action, signing off for our show. Don't forget, you can catch us on YouTube, the We Act Radio's YouTube. You can catch us on our website, and we will be starting our podcast next week. So you'll be able to catch us anytime you want, anywhere you are. Have a great Father's Day, everyone, and thanks so much for listening.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.